Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Nemesis. Now, to give a bit of a backstory about how I came across this movie, I actually saw a film last year that was released, I think, in September of 2022 called Renegades, and how I came across that movie is because one of my favorite actors of all time, Louis Mandylor, happens to be in that movie. And I remember on his social media post, which I think was posted back in, I'm going to say somewhere between summer 2021, end of 2021, or early 2022. I can't remember exact time frame, but somewhere within that time frame. And in that post, he was showing that he was on the set and they were shooting in London at night. And I had asked him in the comment section, are you playing a Cockney gangster? And he was like, no, I'm actually playing an Australian in the movie too. I was like, okay, fair enough. So, and then in anticipation for the release for that film, I had checked out some interviews that I had seen with the cast and crew of Renegades, especially with the producer Jonathan Sothcott, who also produces this movie Nemesis as well. But I'd seen interviews that were done with his wife Jeanine, Nerissa Sothcott, Billy Murray, and Nick Moran. So in the interviews, they talked about their experiences about making the movie, and then both Jonathan and Jeanine had talked about their new production company, Shogun Films, where the Renegades was the second movie under that banner, and the first one being Nemesis. So I decided to check out Nemesis in anticipation for Renegades. I will be honest to say, the first time I saw Nemesis, I had a lot of issues with that movie. Not because I thought the movie was bad. It was just that the story's strong. I'll get into that with my positives here, but there's a really good story with this movie. I had a lot of issues with the film in terms of the technical aspects of the movie that I remember when I first saw it, I just thought, it's fine, and then I moved on with my day. Then I saw Renegades, and when I saw Renegades, I liked the movie, but I actually liked the film more upon repeat viewing. So the more I saw the film, the more I enjoyed the movie, and it's a fun movie for me personally. They deal with a bunch of old guys who are trying to get revenge on their friend who had been killed in the beginning of the movie, played by Lee Majors. So that movie was a lot of fun. I still enjoy this film to this day. But along the way, I had come across another interview with, I think it was with Jeanine or Jonathan, one of those two. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head who, but I had listened to an interview that they had done for promoting Nemesis. What caught my attention about that particular interview with either one of them, because they more or less share the same story, but it's something in particular that stuck out for me, was that they had talked about what they had to go through in making Nemesis, because they shot that movie deep in the pandemic back in September of 2020. So they were talking about how they had a lot of things prepped up for the next set of days to shoot for the scenes they were going to shoot for those respective days. But then like that, it was taken away from them because there was a shutdown. So they had to find another location literally at the last minute. And then once they found a location, they had to go shoot at that location pretty much right away. So it kind of had a pretty scramble schedule. And then at the last minute, they needed one particular scene to shoot at a bar, which that ended up having to be shut down because of the pandemic. They found one at the last minute, they shot it there, and then not even 2 days later, that particular bar had shut down as a result of the pandemic. So they got really lucky by getting by the skin of their teeth to get this movie done. And having learned what they had gone through to make that movie, I went back to go watch the film, and I watched with a whole new set of lenses that made me appreciate the film that much more, because understanding what they had to go through to make that movie, I had realized that the movie, the things that I had appreciated about the film is still very much prevalent. I still have issues with the movie. I'm not going to deny that at all. And I will point out that as far as what those issues are is that I have with this film in my negatives, but the overall story in itself, in my opinion, is a quite a really good story, a really strong one, I would say, at that. And along with the actors as well, too, I would say for the most part, I really did enjoy their performances here. So with this review, I will not be getting to any spoilers here at all, because there's actually one particular reveal in this movie that had actually, I wouldn't say caught me by surprise, but I appreciated with the reveal that we get to learn about a particular character that we are introduced in the very beginning, and then we learn more about them along the way, and then the reveal at the end. So I will not get into any spoilers here, but I will get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. An underworld king, John Morgan, returns to London, reigniting a feud with a vengeful cop who is obsessed with bringing John down. The Morgan family gather in John's apartment to meet their daughter's new girlfriend, but her arrival triggers a deadly game of cat and mouse, ending in revenge and murder, as the family are trapped in their own home by a gang of armed intruders. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with this movie has to do with the overall story that we're following in this narrative. Now, essentially, there's two different stories going on at the same time, where we have Nick Moran's character, who is a cop who is bent on getting John Morgan, played by Billy Murray, who I think is phenomenal in the movie too, along with Nick Moran. But you can see this is a man who's obsessed in trying to bring this man down, despite his best efforts in trying to find evidence on him and trying to get people to cooperate. It never seems to stick. He's never been charged with these accusations that are being thrown at him. And despite all the hard work, it just never comes to fruition. And you can clearly see that this is a man that has made it his mission to see that happen before more or less he dies. But along the way, you get to find out too that this man has also lost his father, and he blames John Morgan for the death of his father. And that's the major motivation as far as why he wants to become a cop. But you also get to find out too, at least from my perspective, that he wanted to be a cop anyways, but certainly that factor of John Morgan, who he blames for the death of his father, is a major contributing factor for him to become a cop, to use the system to bring this man down and have him serve his time too. But despite his efforts, none of it sticking around here, because it seems like John is a very powerful person, where he knows the right people in the right places, and clearly has a lot of influence as well too, that he doesn't seem to be concerned that these accusations are being thrown at him is really going to be a factor for him. But then when he makes his way back to London and having Nick Moran's character basically disrupt a charity event that John is hosting, and revealing, hey, you are a terrible person, these are the things you have done, and assaults him along the way too, you can clearly see this man is beyond his breaking point, where he's just desperate to find a way to bring this man down. And the one thing he's going to do is just put out in the public for people to be aware of here, as kind of a leak for people to be fully aware that this guy is not who you think he is. In fact, he's a lot worse. So you get to see that when he has done all those things in the beginning of the movie, that he now is being held accountable. Like, by the way, you can't do these things. You can't just attack somebody and accuse him for these charges that you're claiming about him, because there's no evidence for us to back it up here, and let alone that's even sticking with it to him, because we have nothing that we can charge him here with. So the fact that you're making these accusations and calling him out like that, you just can't do that. And plus, you assaulted the man too at an event. As a result of that, the police captain, who is very reluctant to do it but has no choice but to do it, has to take away his badge and his gun. And he clearly sees this as a man that Nick Moran's character is drinking all the time, which more likely he's always been drinking on the job, despite the fact he's actually a really good cop. But you can clearly see that he has burned a lot of bridges along the way, to the point where the one man who is showing concern for him has had enough of him, and he realizes that the only way this man's going to learn is we just got to let him go, and he's got to figure it out from there. And that I actually thought was a quite interesting aspect of the story that we get introduced to. But at that point, you don't really see a whole lot of his character throughout the narrative here. And then we follow John Morgan, character played by Billy Murray, who Billy Murray, in my opinion, I'm going to say it right now, this movie has started to make me a fan of Billy Murray, because I had listened to Jonathan Sothcott, again, the producer of the film Nemesis, point out that he's been a fan of Billy Murray for quite some time. He felt like he was one of the best things about this TV show in the UK called The Bill, and his work also in EastEnders as well too, which is a very popular TV show out in the UK. In the years he's worked on that show, he's clearly known for those respective roles in those respective shows, and develop a friendship with him as well too along the way, working on several different projects throughout his career as well. And he's always pointing out that Billy Murray was one of those gentlemen who's a really good actor that just needs to wants to give him an opportunity to try something different that will show him in a different light. I do believe that this movie does accomplish that, as far as what Billy Murray is able to portray here in this character of John Morgan, where clearly he's a gangster, but not the gangster that you think he is. He's not. It's almost, in a lot of ways, he's risen above all that rubble, if you will. And you get to see a guy who is very much composed and very collected, very calm through more or less the commotion. And then at the same time, you can see at a moment's notice, he's able to just turn on more or less that gangster switch, where he's willing to take anybody out, especially when it comes to protecting his family. And I actually thought that was quite a brilliant part of that character that we get to see that Billy Murray deliver in this performance here. One other actor I want to point out is with Jeanine Nerissa Sothcott, who also happens to be the wife of Jonathan Sothcott, the producer of this movie as well too. And they both had Shogun Films, this production company that produced this movie and also Renegade. But the one thing I will say about her character that I do appreciate is that in the British films, especially British gangster films, women, for the most part, aren't necessarily the strongest characters. I would say they are more or less kind of like they have a major contributing factor to the narrative, but they're not always as strong as the male counterparts in those movies. And in this film, I will say I appreciate the fact that we get to see that she's not a woman who is always in need of help, if that makes any sense. When you see the film, I hope you understand what I mean by that. But this is someone who is clearly very, very loyal to her husband, very much in love with him, and at the same time dedicated to him as well too, but can take care of herself along the way. Although you don't necessarily get to see those aspects of the character, but you get hints of that just based on how she conducts herself and how she goes about in speaking to other people, especially when she's having to confront them along the way too. That this is someone who clearly knows how to take care of themselves and is also allowing, in a lot of ways, her husband to do her thing and not necessarily interfering with that. That's the impression that I'm getting about that relationship here. And you can clearly tell they have history with each other and that they very much love each other along the way too. And they still very much feel that way about each other, despite the hurdles they're going through towards the end of the movie. At the same time, I will also point out to more or less kind of close out my review with this movie, with my positive, I meant to say, is that there are two scenes in this movie that stick out the most for me, that are my favorite sequences in the movie. One in particular, the first, which has to do with Nick Moran and the actor who plays the police captain, which I'll have in this for you guys to check out here. That particular sequence, in my opinion, I always felt like was a really strong point to set the tone of as far as what you're getting with this movie. And I will be frank too, there was a part of me that really did wish that we focused a lot more on Nick Moran's character, because even though he's in the movie, he's not in the movie as much as you would think. But the fact is that, you know, you have two different stories going on at once, and then they cross paths with each other towards the end of the film. It's quite an interesting approach, I would say. But with that particular character that Nick Moran plays in this movie, I will say that Nick's performance in those respective sequences that I'm talking about, especially with the scene that he has in the office with his police captain, where his police captain is pretty much telling him, you fucked up and now you got to pay the consequences. Like, well, you mean to tell me that the bad guy out there is fucking people over, killing people? He's not going to suffer the consequences, yet I will, when I just basically pointed out to everybody, this is not a good guy, and I almost attacked him. Well, you did attack him, and they're going to want to press charges on you. You know, so we have to take away your badge, we have to take away your gun, and you're suspended immediately. I always felt like that sequence worked very, very well for me personally, because you get to see the breakup, the breakdown that this man has going through all the years he's worked hard on this here, and clearly it's just breaking him along the way, and yet he's still pushing forward despite the emotional hurdles he's going through, and now it's all taken away from him. I always thought that was such a brilliant scene, in my opinion, and the other actor who played the police captain did a phenomenal job as well too, delivering some strong performances to showcase that I care for you, but you fucked up and you're a liability now, so you gotta go. And you can see that it's hard for him to have to do that. And you can clearly see there's history between them, despite the fact that there's a wedge between them along the way too, caused by Nick Moran's character. The other scene, which is I'm going to say is my favorite scene in the entire movie, has to do with, again, Nick Moran and also Ricky Grover. I understand that Ricky Grover was brought in at the last minute because of this bar sequence that you see, this particular sequence here. They literally shot, that was the last thing they shot for the whole film before that particular bar got shut down because of the pandemic. But I love that scene because what you get in the beginning of the movie with Nick Moran's character, that he is pretty much being stripped away of his duties, and that was his, more or less his identity, like that's his mission. In this scene, he's going back to a place that he used to frequent as a child with his father at this bar. And the bartender says, you know, we don't get new faces around here often. And so what's your story? But it's a genuine, I would say, interest. Not like a question like, who the fuck are you? It's more like, who are you? If that makes any sense. And when Nick Moran's character starts to tell his story, the bartender's like, oh, I do remember you. Your father was Archie. I forgot his last name. I'm terrible with names. Yeah, I remember him. Yeah, I do remember you now. I thought you looked familiar, but you get to see that there is a genuine interest where before in the beginning of the story, people are pushing him away because he's a liability. Yet here's somebody who remembers him from his past, completely unaware of the baggage, and yet is welcoming him and is listening to him and hearing his story, hearing him out, and then giving him advice. And that's the one thing that this guy needed from the very beginning. And the way that Ricky Grover delivers those little nuances about that performance, in my opinion, I hope it doesn't come off the wrong way, but there's a childlike interest that he shows in Nick Moran's character, that he tells him that, I'm sorry you had to go through what you had to go through, but why don't you just do something about this here and get this shit fixed? He said, well, I don't have a badge anymore. He said, well, then what's stopping you? Maybe that's a good thing that you don't have. So now you can just slip through the cracks and handle matters in your own hand. Your father was not a perfect man, but he always did the right thing. But, in order for you to take down the bad guy, sometimes you got to be the bad guy. Fight fire with fire. And something about that for me, usually lines like that could be delivered in a very cheesy manner or in a cheesy situation. For me, I thought that was handled beautifully because Ricky Grover, in my opinion, did a really good job in showing a very authentic interest and care for this character that I thought worked very effectively. And you get to see Nick Moran's performance and receiving that information and processing what's been told to him now gives him a motivation for him to go and get the bad guy. I thought that was handled quite brilliantly, in my opinion. Now, there are other aspects about this movie too that I will say I did enjoy, but that kind of more or less goes into that spoiler territory here for me. So for me, that's going to be the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. Now, with my first negative, I mentioned before that I had a lot of issues with this movie, primarily from the technical aspects of it. But what's interesting for me to point out my negatives with this movie is that even though I still have issues with the technical aspects of this movie, but I'm not as harsh on it as it was the very first time I saw the movie. Because I'll be frank, when I saw the film, I was like, this movie needs to be edited better. What the hell is going on with this shit? Because you have a good movie, but yet I had issues with how certain scenes were composited together that would transition from one sequence to the next. That I remember, I'll never forget one particular scene. There was a wonderful moment with Billy Murray and Bruce Payne when they first meet together in the movie. And there were certain parts of the sequences where they're having a conversation, the camera's going back and forth. There were some brilliant moments when it came to their performances on Billy's part. And then one particular cutscene where he transitions back to him, it just didn't have that same consistency. So clearly the way that it was put together just didn't work all that well for me personally. I'm not sure if anyone else would notice that, but it just seems like you have a great performance in one sequence, and then within that same scene, the next sequence, it just didn't have the same consistency where the performance that we got, a minute before didn't carry over there. And then after that scene that I had an issue with, or that sequence rather, there's another wonderful, beautiful moment that I thought that Billy Murray delivered when it came to his performance for that character in that scene with Bruce Payne. And it happens a lot throughout the narrative of this movie where you have great scenes, you have great performances, and then once in a while there will be some, I wouldn't say bad performances, but just inconsistency with those performances from what you got previously that was beautiful, and then the next set of events, it just seemed a little off-putting for me. And then I noticed that happened quite a bit, and then there's the way that certain scenes would transition from one scene to the next, I had issues with, where you have a beautiful shot set up from one angle, and then the next angle, it just didn't have the same consistency with what we got previously. So having learned with what they had to go through in making this movie, after I had seen the film, I had a better understanding, at least for me personally, that clearly they had one location, which I'm sure they prepped for to the best of their ability at that point. And then that location was taken away because it was shut down, and they had to find something else. And then they had to just go with the flow and get everything done on the spot as quickly as they can before a potential shutdown would occur. So there seems to be a bit of a rush aspect to this movie because of those particular edit choices that were made along the way, where I'm sure that that was not the intention at all whatsoever, but it happened to turn out that way. At least that's what it looked like to me. So with that being said, though, the issues that I had with the film wasn't necessarily with the story at all. The story is great. I actually like the story a great deal. And there are some great sequences in that movie too that turn out beautiful with some great performances along the way. But just those particular things that I said about the film were a major sticking point for me personally. I will also be honest too and point out that there were some actors, I'm not going to say which ones, but it's not Billy Murray, it's not Jeanine, and it's not Nick Moran, nor is it Ricky Grover, or the gentleman that played the police captain, and a few other actors as well. But just certain actors that I just had issues when it came to their performances that I just did not. I always felt like it was, in comparison to what we got with Billy Murray in his scenes, where you see you get to see how good of an actor he really is. Some of the other actors around him just didn't like keep up with him. I'm not saying it was everybody, it was just certain people. And I always felt like that kind of took me out of the film, because you have a great build up with these performances and how it was executed, and the other person just didn't keep up with it, if that makes any sense. So those were really my only major issues with the film. Outside of that, I don't think that the issues that I had before, where I kind of dismissed certain things about the film, having learned what they had gone through to make the movie, I should say, I appreciate the film a lot more because of the hard work they had to go through to making the movie. Because there's one thing that Luis Manuel has said before in the past, that making movies like going to war. It's going to be a tough thing to do, and for them to make the film turn out the way that it did, I got to give them a lot of credit, especially when they shot it during the pandemic, deep during that period when it was just a major shutdown, where it's literally one thing after another being shut down at a moment's notice here. So for them to get the film to turn out the way that it did, I got to give them a lot of props for that. So for me, that's going to be the name of my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. Now, I will say that as much as I did enjoy the movie, I didn't love the film. I really do enjoy the film, and I really do respect the film that much more because of what I had learned, what it took to make this movie. So everyone involved, when it came to the hard work that was put into this film, I do appreciate it a lot more. And I will also point out too that when I did see this movie the first time, I said before, I did like the story a lot. And I actually understand with what Jonathan and his wife Jeanine were trying to do in making a film that's not very common in the UK, because I believe Jeanine had said that there's really isn't that many, or if at all, any home invasion British films. So the idea of cloaking a British film in a home invasion movie in a form of a gangster film obviously will have an appeal with the people in the UK, and then in turn hopefully have an appeal for everyone else as well too, who like more or less this type of genre here. So I do appreciate that, but the story to me is really the selling point as far as what gets revealed along the way and the characters that we're following here as well too. And then again, with all the hard work that went into making this film, I do have a much deeper sense of appreciation, especially in the last, I would say, couple of years, but specifically in the last 6 to 7 months, where my perception of the making of films and the critiques I had with certain films along the way has changed a great deal. So for me, although I did enjoy the film a great deal, I didn't love it, but I still think it's a good movie because there's something you can take away from the film that I believe if you just give it the time of the day when you check it out, that you actually may enjoy with this movie. So I would say this movie is definitely a raise a glass. And those are my thoughts on the film. And I'll make sure to have the link for the movie Nemesis in the description down below for you guys to check out. And just for kicks, I'm also going to throw in Renegades as well too, because both of those films are available for free on Tubi, which is a streaming platform that I fucking love it. I think it's my new streaming platform right now because they have got great movies in the catalog. They have mainstream films, indie movies, Tubi originals, a lot of which that I come across here are actually quite good, which I highly recommend you guys all to check out. And also check out those two films in the description down below. And if you have seen both of those movies, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you guys share, like a video, hit the notification bell while you're down there as well. Also follow NRW on social media, on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. You can follow me on my social media accounts. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina. On Twitter, You're So Cool with WRM. And also on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And my guest this week on my show, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, is the producer of Nemesis and Renegades, and Mr. Jonathan Sothcott. I am very excited for you all to check out that conversation that him and I have had, because there's a lot of interesting details that he has talked about when it comes to the journey he has gone through in producing movies and the highs and lows that come with that, and what more or less motivated him to start Shogun Films along with his wife. And the potential that I saw in Nemesis, and especially with Renegades, because Renegades is a film that I really did enjoy. It's a fun film in my opinion, which I hope you guys do go out of your way to check out, because I think you guys will get a kick out of it, especially if you're into the action genre like myself. But there's just a lot of things that I can see that Jonathan is trying to accomplish here when it comes to the type of movies he wants to make, which is the films that he grew up watching, like the action films like Total Recall, RoboCop, what else? First Blood, just to name a few. There's a lot of great movies that him and I actually have a lot in common that we really do enjoy when it comes to the action genre. It's funny because he's pointed out too that his favorite actor of all time, like myself, is Sylvester Stallone. So I had a great time with my conversation, which I hope you all will as well too. So be on the lookout for that show dropping this Friday here on the NRW. So that'll be it for my review this week, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, stay safe out there and cheers.